Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Exodus. So we're on episode 3 now. My name is Blake Isbill, and thanks for joining me. So last week, you might have heard me talk a little bit at the end about talking about kind of the ideas people had about God. Um, and I'm kind of shifted it. All this week, I've been kind of struggling what to do because my mind kept jumping from place to place to place. I feel like I landed on something pretty good to talk about today, which is the character of God. I kind of want to highlight that. And this might be a multiple part thing because God is so expansive, it's kind of hard to capture them all in just, a 30-minute episode. But I'm going to try to highlight some of his characteristics that I feel like are really important. So the confusion that some people have with God is a lot of people have kind of a different idea. There, even some Christians you may ask, and they may tell you different ideas they have of God. For example, like we talked about last week, Job's friends. Job's friends all had these kind of weird karma-like ideas about God and the way He deals out judgment and rewards. And so that's something that can just be important to know because it is hard to kind of, I don't know, quantify God. Just really think about Him. Think about Him real seriously because He is so beyond what we can grasp. But I want to go into the first point where God is like, I guess you would say, an individualistic God. So God cares about you, the person. God cares about you. So, first point I want to bring up is Abraham asked God not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're going to be hopping around, kind of giving examples of these things. So in Genesis 18, God is pretty upset because He knows the misdeeds of Sodom and Gomorrah and how awful they've been. There's a lot of sexual immorality going on there, a lot of other stuff, and so he was going to destroy it because he was that upset with them. However, this bothered Abraham, prompting him to ask God if, "Wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it?" So Abraham's asking a pretty, I guess, a reasonable question that all of us might ask, which is, well, wait, you're going to destroy the city. What if there's innocent people in it? And so, what is concerning Abraham is he doesn't want innocent people to die. So I don't think Abraham's coming at this from a place of questioning God, but really just a little worried, which is concerning Abraham. And honestly, God kind of responds and says, "Okay, if there's 50 people, I won't destroy you. If you can find me 50 people." And they have this back and forth for a little bit until they get down to 10. God says, "If you can find me 10 people within that city that are righteous, I won't destroy it. I'll just leave it alone." But at this point, Abraham knows, yeah, there isn't. See, Abraham kind of admits that, or accepts this answer, which is that there aren't any righteous people in this city. But that is just a point to God to just say that God was not willing to destroy this city if there were righteous people in it. Even if it far outweighed the unrighteous, far outweighed the righteous, He still wasn't willing to do that. Second point is parable of the lost sheep. This is a pretty popular one, but I'm going to just read it out here. It was in Luke 15. What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. When he comes home, he calls together all his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." I tell you that in the same way, there will be joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. And Jesus is talking about here just the joy of a sinner repenting. See, there's obviously, I don't think Jesus is meaning here to say at all that there isn't happiness, that there already are saved people. But the joy that is found from someone turning to Christ is just so great, even in heaven. And we know heaven is just a perfect place. So that's got to show some crazy, insane amount of love from God and Jesus for us that it's just this big like ordeal. Even in a couple of verses later, in verse 10, it says, Jesus says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." So, like, it's kind of a whole celebration. There's a whole party up there for whenever you turn to God. And isn't that awesome? Just a whole celebration just for you. Um, and then, third point on this one, I wanted to say is it comes from Luke 12, verse 7. And it says, this section is kind of discussing how we shouldn't fear others because if they were to kill us, then they can only kill our flesh. They have no control over our soul, no dominion over where we go. We should have that respect, that fear for God, obviously. But God goes on to say that he knows of every sparrow in the sky, every bird in the sky. He knows about all of them. And he does not forget about a single one of them. And then Jesus goes on to say, "Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear. You are of more value than many sparrows." So here he's saying, obviously, I know of all the birds in the sky, and I care about you a ton more than I care about any birds. So again, it's just showing this kind of we're not all just grouped together. Jesus isn't just looking at us as, oh yeah, I like Earth, like I like the people of Earth. He's like, no, I like Blake, I like Bob, I like Jim. God loves all of us, and he has this special love and interest in all of us. And then I forgot I had one more point in Ezekiel 18:20, and I wanted to just bring this up because this is something people sometimes are concerned about. It says, "The son will not bear the punishment for the father's iniquity, nor will the father bear the punishment for the son's iniquity." What this here is saying is you're not going to suffer for the sins of your father. In that to say that, like, you're not going to be judged according to what someone else has done by God. And that is another thing that, I think is a sort of a testament to God's idea of, I guess you'd say, individual view on each of us. God could very easily say, well, your father was a pretty awful person. Here, you're not going to have it great in life. But no, he doesn't look at us as just the products of who we come from or circumstances or whatever. He looks at us as each the individual person. So then my second point is that God listens to the pleas of others, and to say that God is listening to you. God is listening to you. So this first story I want to bring up, I never hear it get brought up, but I think it is the most interesting thing in the Old Testament. I think it's so cool. So this is the story of Joshua. So Joshua chapter 10. Joshua at this point had been in multiple battles in which the Lord had kind of been behind him in a lot of these, and one of them being the capturing of Ai. You might just pronounce it I, I'm not too sure. But along with the destruction of it, similar to the destruction of Jericho, where God was behind them for that, the inhabitants of the land of Gibeon were being nice to Joshua and to the Israelites because of this. So Gibeon was like, hey, let's make peace with you, right? We like what you're doing, so let's make peace with you. And this scared King Adon-Zedek. I'm just going to call him Zedek because long name. But he was the king over Jerusalem. And this was scaring him because Gibeon was a very strong land. And he did not want Joshua to team up with this other land because then it kind of put him in trouble. So this made the king contact 4 other kings. And these 5 kings in total went to go and attack Joshua and Gibeon. Joshua 10:4 says, "Come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel." So that here they're planning to kill him. Well, in this battle, God said to Joshua to not be scared, as he has given them into your hands. So what this is saying, given them into your hands, is saying that God has delivered this battle into Joshua's hands, as in, you've won. I mean, you haven't won yet, but like, you're gonna win, so don't worry about it. And this is exactly what God did. And as Joshua and Gibeon were succeeding in this battle, Joshua made a plea to God. He made this request to God. And here's what he says: O sun, stand still at Gibeon, and O moon at the valley of Ajalon, so that the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation avenged themselves of their enemies. And the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. Now, I think that's really cool. For, uh, for about a whole day, the sun stood in its place and the moon stood in its place. Is that not amazing? Joshua cried out to God, this plea to God, um, and God, listened to this request of Joshua. This God is listening. We don't have a God who's just deaf to us, or we're not just worshiping some statue or something. No, 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 no. God really can hear us, and isn't that cool that He listened to Joshua's super huge ask on this? So that's really cool. Um, then I want to go on to the next point, which is Moses asking for another chance for the Israelites. We're going back to Moses because a lot of this applies to Moses. And this is in two different places, actually, but I'm just going to talk about the one in Exodus 32. So when Moses was up on Mount Sinai getting the Ten Commandments written, the people down the hill were getting impatient, and they're like, man, Moses isn't coming back, so we got to do something. Let's make ourselves a golden calf. So they make a golden calf and they start worshiping it, and this makes God furious, obviously, because God has just delivered all these people out of Egypt out of certain death, and they're turning to something else because they can't wait a few days. So God says, now then, let me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation. But Moses then pleaded with God, asking that he spare the Israelites, telling God how the people of Egypt would think, oh, well, God just took these people into the wilderness to kill them. And to remember Abraham and Israel and Jacob, that he made that covenant to multiply them and make them, their descendants like sands or stars in the sky. And then this is very interesting. This verse says right here, so the Lord changed his mind about the harm which he had said he would do to his people. Now, I want to say this right here. God would have been totally, totally justified in doing as he said, which is destroying them and starting with Moses. Because you notice that he said here, once again, another thing about God being individualistic. Moses didn't do anything wrong. He was up on the hill with them. So he was saying, I'll make a great nation of you, but I'm going to destroy them. And God would have been totally justified because they are going directly against him in a pretty extreme way. He did make Abraham's descendants very many. So it's not like he's breaking a covenant. He really is justified in this. But he listened to Moses. Moses said, please, don't do that. And it happens later again in Numbers, but all this to say that I think there are times where some people think that God's kind of got this linear path of everything that's going to happen and nothing can change it. But sometimes it seems like that God allows us through prayer to see one way or the other. And this is one of those times where God listened to Moses. So I think that's very interesting that it's talking about God changing his mind in this way. And then the last way in this one is about Hannah, and this is in 1 Samuel. So Hannah was one of the wives of Elkanah. Some interesting names coming up here. And Hannah was unable to bear children because God had closed her womb. That's what it says. However, I'm just going to call her Peninnah. She could have kids. See, both of these women were wives of Elkanah. And Elkanah seemed to show some favor to Hannah, giving her double portions whenever these things were going down. And Peninnah provoked and tried to irritate Hannah. She was making fun of her essentially for not being able to have kids, which is really messed up, obviously. And that saddened Hannah greatly. And she wept and she prayed to God. She said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. And that was verse 11. Um, and he did. He allowed her to have a child, and Samuel became a pretty important figure in the Old Testament. With all this to say that the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. She was unable to bear children, but because of this prayer, God said, okay, I will allow you to have children. Just to say that, I guess it's almost a testament to how prayer works. Just that Hannah, through praying earnestly to God, was able to have the child because of his grace. So then to our third point, I want to say God cares about us in a personal way. So God desires you. God desires you. So this first part, I kind of want to just read it as it's written because I can't really do justice if I try to do it myself. So this is talking about how God was kind of sad that the Israelites weren't following him when they were in the wilderness. This is from Psalm 78. But he, being compassionate, forgave their iniquity and did not destroy them. And often he restrained his anger and did not arouse all his wrath. Thus he remembered they were but flesh, a wind that passes and does not return. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. Again and again they tempted God and pained the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power. Hear that again. Let me say that one more time. Again and again they tempted God and pained the Holy One of Israel. So it's kind of sad today that we have this idea that God is basically just this robot who judges us all the time and that's about it. No, we can see here that God very really and understandably is upset with Israel at this time because they're just going against him. It's saying that it pains him greatly. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I understand the exact workings of the emotions of God. I truly don't. But we can see that there is sort of certainly this disappointment and sadness from God in the fact that his people are just turning their back on him and he loves them so much and they're just totally spitting in his face. Then I wanted to go on to this next part, which is in John 11. So this part I'm going to kind of skip around because we're mainly focusing on Jesus' reaction. So in John 11, essentially what happens is these two sisters, Mary and Martha, were telling Jesus that their brother Lazarus was really sick and they was probably going to die. And Jesus cared for these people very, very much. And once Jesus went there, Lazarus had been buried in the tomb for 4 days. And the sisters were expressing sadness to Jesus, saying, well, if you had been here, then he would have been okay, but you weren't here. It made them sad because Lazarus was now dead. I just want to read this part and just kind of highlight this. It says, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. Jesus is saddened for the people mourning Lazarus. And then this is where we get the verse, Jesus wept. Now, all this to say that Jesus is not crying for the same reason that they are crying, right? Jesus, he'll talk about in the Gospels how, this is not like the final life. Like, just because they're dead does not mean they are, permanently gone forever. No. So it's not a question of Jesus being sad over that way, but Jesus was sad seemingly over the mourning that these people had for Lazarus, which, once again, I think is very interesting just to say that Jesus is caring about this situation because these people care about this situation. I just kind of want to say that because, this is a little off of this, but just to say that you should be praying realistically for everything, even things that seem really small, because God cares about you, and so God kind of cares about the stuff that you care about. Here's an example a more dramatic example, but an example of something that Jesus knows is all right, but he's still sad because of the people are sad around him. And then the last point for this one, I wanted to talk about Genesis 2:18. So this is when Adam's in the garden, but Eve is not yet around. And Jesus says, or not Jesus, sorry, God, then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him." Um, and I just kind of highlighted this because I thought this was pretty interesting just to say that Adam didn't necessarily like need a wife. Like it wasn't like it wasn't like air, water, food, or anything. But like God said, it would be better for him to have a wife, a companion in this place. And I thought that was just kind of interesting, where God isn't just like supplying the, just our bare needs. He's giving more. And I just think that's pretty interesting. And he kind of does this just because it would be better for Adam, which is I think is great. Fourth point, I've got a lot of points this episode. I'm not sure if you could tell, but God sacrificed His Son for us. So God sacrificed for you. God sacrificed for you. So because of how much God loves us, He sent His Son. Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates His own love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Okay, so I know it's easy to kind of just skip over Jesus dying for us because we hear it so much. But it's a good reason we hear it so much because it's so darn important. It's a love so deep that He allowed His Son to suffer for us. And because we know that, we don't know how we know, but we know that Jesus is God. It's confusing, but He is. He's allowing Himself to suffer. He's allowing His Son to suffer. It's a deep, deep, deep cut to Him for us. And I don't mean to sound so morbid or talking down, but He died for us and gave us everything. And we can never even begin to repay that type of payment. I mean, there's nothing we can give. He did that because He loved us so much. He wants us up there with Him. And I just think that's an important thing to remember. Then in Matthew 26:53, this was as the people were gathering around about to capture Jesus. This was right after Judas kissed him and was going to send him to his death. Peter came forward and sliced one of the slaves of the high priest their ear because he didn't want them to take Jesus. But Jesus got on to Peter for this, and He said, "Or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and He will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way?" So obviously Jesus is saying here, this has to happen, right? And so, don't do anything. Don't rebel against this. But also, what I think is important to note here is that Jesus has the power to get out of this, right? Jesus does not have to just if Jesus really, really, really said, "You know what, I'm not going to do this," then He wouldn't have to. But He did anyways. I'm not sure there's any of us who would do that. Because of the suffering that He went through after the betrayal from people He loved. I mean, it's the worst death you can imagine, honestly. It's not just because of the physical, but it's the emotional too. And He honestly could have just not done it. But He did for our sakes. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. And then one more for this point is Jesus made Himself low, which Philippians 2:7-8. And God basically being the Most High, which is the title talked about in the Old Testament, being the Most High, being born in a manger. I mean, really, here, but emptied Himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men, being found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus is humbling himself, right? Jesus is making himself pretty low. It talks about here, him looking as a man. And it's not only that Jesus, made himself just, flesh and blood, but also Jesus could have made himself a king. Jesus could have made himself be born to super rich parents or powerful parents, but no, no, no. He chose a humble lifestyle. He was born as a common man, honestly. And I think that's very interesting because all of these points, everything that I'm looking at here, and maybe you agree, but maybe it's just me, but I have a feeling we all kind of think this way. I think it's a very good thing that none of us are God or Jesus, because I would not have this much patience or this much humility at all. But luckily, God is God, and He chose to be humble when He came to this earth. And for my final point, I want to talk about God is still alive. He is the living God. Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. That's the song we played at the beginning, the song we'll play at the end. Okay, so God is the living and everlasting God, Jeremiah 10:10. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God and everlasting King. At His wrath the earth quakes, and the nations cannot endure His indignation. The Old Testament shows prophecy for things to come all the time. And some of the stuff in the Old Testament has come. It talks about Jesus. In a past episode, I talked about something in Isaiah, maybe Isaiah 7:14, where it talks about Jesus coming, and Jesus obviously did. But also the Old Testament and the New Testament talks about stuff that has yet to come. It is prophesying things that have not yet happened. So, I know it's easy to kind of read the Old Testament and see these crazy grand things happening and think, whoa, I'm not really sure we have that God anymore. No, we do. We totally do. And it is the same God. And there is stuff happening, and there is stuff that will be to come. Jesus was crucified but rose 3 days later. Revelation 1:17-18. See, Jesus was raised from the dead, but that's not the end of his story. The reason I even bring that up, that might sound kind of like common sense, but I think we and other people just sort of think sometimes, well, Jesus rose from the dead, all that great stuff happened in the New Testament, and we're kind of in a lull now. We're kind of at a break, like at a break right now. We're not. We're totally not. In Revelation, the reason I bring this up is because I want to say in Revelation, John writes of things that are to come later, Revelation. And when he first is starting to do this, Jesus talks to him and he falls down on his face, and here's what it says. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man, and he placed his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. And I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. Okay, he is the living one. He is the first and he is the last. Just to say Genesis to the end of time. And I really like that part, because I thought it would be good to kind of end off that on Revelation, just to say that from the beginning of Genesis, we see that he's around, to Revelation, he's still around, talking about how he'll forever be around. Isn't that cool? And then I want to talk about this. Life is worth the living just because he lives. So the reason I chose that song for today is because I think it's a very good sort of reminder on this type of thing. I don't mean to be so down, but I think it's true, and I think it needs to be said. If God isn't real, and if all of this is just an accident, then what are we living for? What do we really have to look forward to? Because it all ends in the same way. But if God is real, if Jesus is real, and if he really wants this personal relationship with all of us, don't we sort of owe it? Don't we sort of owe it to at least try to look for him, try this whole thing out? So I guess a sort of call to action for anyone who isn't saved is just really consider it, because you know, just give it thought, because I don't know. I think it all sounds pretty convincing to me. But and all this to say that now you should live for him. Now you should live for him. But yes, that has been the Exodus, episode 3. And I will see you guys next week.